Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and welcome to Mondays with Mr. Happy, aka Mr. Happy Mondays, the weekly Q&A show where you ask me questions and I answer them. So apologies a little bit because this has been a crazy week for me. Both my Final Fantasy XIV and Final Fantasy XI Let's Play parts didn't come out because I'm dumb and didn't realize I was never going to have time to upload them if I didn't upload them super far in advance. So that's my fault. They're all recorded. I have weeks worth of them recorded, and they will be continuing their normal schedule this week with Tuesday and Friday for the Final Fantasy XIV Let's Play and Wednesday and Saturday for the Final Fantasy XI Let's Play. Also, apologies, is last week when I put up the Mondays with Mr. Happy question thread, I accidentally named it the same week. So I basically had like two week 212 question threads as opposed to labeling the one for this week 213. So I guess people didn't ask as many questions in that one. So it's going to be a short video because I'm doing this after a day of just working on scripts for guides. We're trying to get all of the content guides. I think I have like 12 of them to do with the dungeons, with Suzaku Normal, Extreme, the Savages, the normal modes for Omega. Plus, I want to do some stuff on the updates to the Gold Saucer. I have some videos I want to make on raid progression and how it's progressed over the years. I've got a lot of video ideas. I'm feeling pretty motivated, but I got to get all that worked on before MapleStory 2 comes out in about a week. So I'm on a bit of a time constraint, which is I'm kind of glad there's only 5 questions this week. But before we answer those 5 questions, let's thank our sponsors over on Patreon. They've been helping us combat hashtag demonetized for quite some time, and as such, we gotta throw some thanks their way. I gotta fix and update this list at some point, though, because it's not up to date entirely. I know a few names on here that don't belong anymore, or some names that may not have been added properly. But anyway, let's get to that. We have our Patron of Light, of course. We have Khuja Cross on Jenova, who has been a massive supporter for all of these months. Thank you so much for your continued support. I know I always say I have nothing that I knew that I can say here because I'm so used to saying it, but thank you. You're very much appreciated. You know who else I appreciate? All of our other sponsors as well. And there are quite a few of them. We have our standard sponsors. We have, oh, I can't even get to the bottom of the list anymore. I scrolled down. It's like, wait, there's one on the next page. We have a Nye-rick and Kaya Amatsuki of Midgardsormr. We have Rendil Gaming, Sabo Empire, Mizra, Red Wings of the Baron FC from Zalera, Fray Blackheart, Cidus Oreo on Shiva, Syd Hellwind of Gilgamesh, Afro Ninja from Malboro, Cheesecake from Leviathan, Sploda, That Lame Weeb, Ashen Emiya of Cerberus, Argoti Tristam on Midgardsormr, Fafarian, Rendil, Giraffeswillrule, Stevie-Rex, and Neon. We also have our elite sponsors. We have Senchi, Crimson and Talvia Swift of Coral, Shadow Link on the Tonberry server, Dom, Asuka Wig on the Jenova server, the Millionella of Midgardsormr, Sarah and the Avalanche Family on Malboro, Janu Ayatsu, Kifka and the Great Eagles on Exodus, Dark Graver, Katayoshi from Khuja, Skia Symphonia from Ragnarok, Rah Xephon from Exodus, Rynoet Westos the Purple Warrior, Edric Red Steel on Exodus, Lexxie Valentine, Mantaru and the Rivivus FC from Zodiark, Sour Cream and Tribes from Jenova, Rynoet Chikara, Goetia Valfer of Siren, Hirschverse of Fairy, Phoenix Down FC on Goblin, and Saren from Zodiark. And finally, we have our premium sponsors. We have Jonathan, Shinka, Casual Heroes FC on Midgardsormr, Tatachataka on Hyperion, Kana Azuki of Jenova, Yu Starla on Coral, Sathal, Sarah Frost from Behemoth, Diablo, Holy Tabasco, Red Thorn Asura, Asken Hawk from Shiva, Crass015, Mustang, Serenity FC on Ultros, Kat Kazuma, Serial Kira on Cactar, Ignis Fairgun from Diablos, Valestra of Fanfret, Knock Quarters from Excalibur, Corvus Moonscar, Private Mikey, Spike, Nadia and Kurasami, Rudy Rudiger, Tin Colossus, Killer Hackman, Brawl Jr., and Kiltastic Jones. Thank you to everyone over on Patreon, and thank you to everyone just watching in general. I feel like I say it a lot, but I never also feel like I say it enough, but I do really feel good about myself every week that I read this list, every week when I look at the comment sections, and I feel really good, and I felt, you know, recently way better than, you know, more recent times. So I've been on an upswing with the way that I feel, with my confidence, and I'm hoping that I can keep that and provide more to you guys going into the coming months, especially as we build some excitement for the expansion. So thank you again to everyone who's sponsored on Patreon, and everyone who watches every week, and everyone who watches any of the YouTube videos we have on the channel. But anyway, we've got just a few questions on the forums, so let's get to it. All right, for our first question, oh, this is somebody who I'm not going to say their name unless they say it in their own thing, but this is someone I always butt heads with on live stream chat. I have so many disagreements, and yet I have so many agreements with them at the same time that I can never be mad at them for too long. So I'm glad to see them asking a question here, because I don't think I get too many questions from them on Mondays with Mr. Happy. Sup, Happy? Haven't asked a question in a while, so I figured I'd toss one out there while I have some free time. See, told you. You'll see this next week, so hopefully you've cleared Alphascape as fast as you wanted. Not as fast as I wanted, but I think considering the way the tier was designed, it was about as fast as it probably should have been for what I was aiming for. So I have 3 predictions for 5.0 and 3 predictions we'll transition into the question. 1, we're getting Viera as a playable race, more Fantasia sales. I mean, they're never going to be against more Fantasia sales. Dancer is the new healer, and we're getting 4-man Savage dungeons akin to Mythic Plus. At least this is my hope. The reason why is because I feel like more than anything, people in the mid-core have been asking for a different path of progression, and now with recent success of Rathalos showing it's possible for them to create somewhat challenging 4-man bosses, I believe now is the time. I think it can be done, such as having two or so slightly reworked dungeons for the raid patch, still having tome gear, but maybe adding a slightly higher item level, maybe 5 item levels higher than Tomestone gear, but 5 below raids, or allowing the current tome gear to get more materia slots to open up instead of just replacing gear. Maybe use whatever you obtain from weekly Savage 4-man dungeons to supplement the upgrading tomestones and or raid gear. My question is this, kind of like a multi-part question. This is a good question for me to only have 5 questions in a given week, by the way. Do you think this is the time for them to add more forms of progression, or will this satisfy the community that feels there's a lack of mid-core content to keep them staying subbed after they clear the raid tier? And do you think Square Enix and Yoshi P will put more resources into expanding progression or new content with each patch? Do they even have the resources? Apologies if the question was too long. No, if there was ever going to be a week for a question this long, this was the week to do it. So anyway, I'm always down for more paths to progression. You know, a big thing about Final Fantasy XIV is that it's generally one of the more approachable MMOs. You know, you don't have to go your longest crazy rep grind, which would be kind of like a comparable thing to another MMO, is kind of just the main story. And we have some shortcuts for that paid, and we have some paid shortcuts for it, and we also have things such as the Road to 60 buff to speed that up. Progressing through the levels is just not... It is a long experience, but it could be drawn out a lot longer at the cost of it being just even more mundane than it can be thanks to some of the story quests. So more forms of progression is always a good thing. More difficult 4-man content is always a good thing. It's one of the things I've asked about. I've straight up asked Yoshi P, hey, do you know what Mythic Plus is? Can we get it? And he said he wants to expand on the dungeon system. So it's something I really do hope to see a little bit more of. And I do think you can do basic things like give it a slight item level increase over what it was before, but I think you need to take it a step further. It can't just be like a 5 item level buff, because that's not really, I guess, akin to, I guess, the spirit of Mythic Plus. It also needs to be legitimately challenging, or it needs to be able to constantly go up to being legitimately challenging. Things like leaderboards, things like community projects around the idea of who can climb the highest, you know, supporting things like the dungeon races that we have with World of Warcraft, things like that. You need to build content around your content, if that makes sense. You know, you need to be able to support things like that. And they're starting to see more success with PvP. I know we laugh at it a lot, but with the recent, you know, tournaments that have been being held with the shoutcasting, you know, it feels like they're making content around their own content, which, whether or not you're a huge fan of the PvP in the game, is better for the health of that particular type of content. So I think that just doing that would be okay. If there's a maximum to reach for, like a maximum, I guess, difficulty that you can go to, people will always kind of gravitate to see who's the first person to clear that. But then you also have to start considering, you know, do they do these? I think, honestly, this would be something for a 0.5 patch, just thinking about it myself, where, you know, you have a dungeon incorporated and you have its more difficult version incorporated in the 0.5. So after all the, you know, really hardcore people are kind of done with their actual, like, hardcore raid progression, they have this, and this can have the things like leaderboards or I guess races and stuff like that, just content around the content. It's a really weird thing to describe, but yes, I do think that they could definitely do with more content. I think they can do it, and I do think that they'll eventually have the resources for it. The problem is the majority of their resources end up going into things like art and design, sound, things like that, which are, I guess, it's easier to take a skill that's sort of applied to multiple facets and apply them to Final Fantasy XIV in those categories. Whereas combat designers are few and far between. They're always looking to recruit more, though. They tell us every time, please, if you see it, please apply for the job, because they want more people to design content. It's clear they want more. It's also just clear they're not always just grabbing people for no reason just because they need more. They're pretty strict about what it is that they actually add. As for your other predictions, you know, Viera is such a tough one. I'm afraid they'll have to make changes to the way it functions sort of visually to really put it in. And as for Dancer, I mean, anything can happen with the jobs. I mean, Dancer and Blue Mage have been at the top of my I guess, guest list. Puppet Master is always at the top of my wish list. Blue Mage and Dancer are kind of at the top of my prediction list for the expansion, with Geomancer also being a pretty high probability one for me. I feel like Geomancer, just with the amount of attention Geomancy has received as a whole, it's kind of almost on, it's kind of bordering now on the, there's so much Geomancy that I don't really know if we would get it, but they're starting to establish like how wide of a field Geomancy is, which leaves room for the job implementation to not just be kind of as we see in the Astrologian questline, or the White Astrologian? I think it's in the Astrologian questline. So yeah, for all that, hopefully that was a satisfactory answer. Alright, question number 2. Hello, Mr. Hello. Non-14 question. If you'd rather they be 14 questions, listen, I don't care what kind of questions they are, as long as you're just not asking me things that are inappropriate. And you'll know if they're inappropriate if, when this video airs, this question isn't here. So far we're off to a good start. Anyway, I'm just wondering if you'd be interested in streaming any Sega Genesis games for your YouTube Let's Play videos. Something different and fun, unless you hate old 16-bit Sega Genesis. The Sega Genesis does what Nintendo... I had the Nintendo growing up. I had friends who had the Genesis and the Saturn and all that stuff. But the thing is, I like Sega games. Like, I grew up, like, literally borrowing my friend's Sega and just playing Sonic, like, all day, every day. All of them just over and over again. I eventually did have the Game Gear, one of the models of the Game Gear. They didn't even say Game Gear on it. It just was called the Sega something else, but it was probably just like a later or earlier model of the Game Gear or something like that. But playing for YouTube, that doesn't really make sense for my YouTube channel. If there's any good RPGs on the Sega Genesis, that would make sense for my YouTube channel. But even then, I'd have to kind of be like dead done with everything else that I'm working on the YouTube channel, and even then it would still be kind of a reach. That's not really something that I feel like matches what I would want to do on my channel. It's more something I would do in my free time and just completely separate it from work overall. Question number 3. Hello, Mr. Happy. Hope you're having a good day. I am. Thank you very much. Well, my question is, since you raid on day 1, how do you and your static figure out how mechanics work, what buffs does what, even when the game doesn't tell you? Have you ever recorded a video showing people how people figure out mechanics of new Savage raid bosses? So I wouldn't say I've recorded videos, but when you generally watch a progression stream, you start to kind of see what the process is like. The biggest thing is to just not rule out anything. Some ideas are really off the wall and they're like the last things you'll check for. But the idea is to just generally, if you see a debuff, screenshot it. That's number 1 for progressing day 1. Because if you don't have enough time to read it, you don't have enough time to understand it. So that is number 1. Always screenshot debuffs and then open them to read what they did after the fact. That way you can start actually formulating what your kind of strategy you want to use to counter that specific buff or debuff. As for everything else, it's kind of just a matter of, I don't know how to describe it. You just kind of look and test things out. I'll give an example. You know, Midgardsormr, horizontal, when you see him doing a little spinning animation, you can't assume that's for no reason. You know, you have to, there's text associated with it. There's just no other boss really does that. You know, if you see him doing the vertical spins or horizontal spins, you have to eventually notice that he does 2, and then on the second one, something happens. You know, and then you have to notice, oh, well, there he did 2 horizontals and it did this. I wonder if he does something different when he does a horizontal than a vertical. And he does, and then you go, okay, so well, that's how that entire thing works. Sometimes it's just a matter of like luck. One example would be on O12 Savage. There's a mechanic where you have to be you're hit by a charge, but you have to be very far away from the boss, and there's really no place to tell you that it's a proximity AoE, or that, not proximity AoE, but its damage is based on your proximity to the boss and their charge location. But at some point during one of the pulls, somebody survives and goes, okay, how did I live that? Where was the boss in relation to me? Did anyone else get hit before me? You know, you start just going down what the possibilities are, because MMOs have been done to death. All the mechanics have been done to death in MMOs. And they're generally just remixes or clever interpretations of what's already happened, what's come before that. So you just kind of just go down the list and try to figure things out. You start looking at, okay, did only the healers get targeted? Hey, who got targeted? Astro and White Mage. Okay, next time with all 8 people live, see if it targets them again. Okay, it did it. See it again. Okay, now we've confirmed it. That's another thing. Try to have all 8 people alive. You can't really 100% understand a mechanic unless all 8 people are alive for that mechanic, which is why raising during prog is one of the most important things. Because when you get to something new and it's supposed to be something that's on both the tanks, but suddenly a tank and like the red mage has it, the mechanic doesn't make any sense. You just go, wait, what? That doesn't make any sense. I don't have data. Let me pull again. understanding when you have enough data to make a conclusion and when you don't have enough data to make a conclusion is another important aspect. There's just so much breaking apart. It's like dissecting something and just breaking it apart piece by piece. And you just kind of do it, you know, once you start doing it, it just starts to make sense. You just logic your way into that until you find something that sticks, and then you work on that. And then maybe in the subsequent weeks, you work on improving what stuck the first time, you know, finding a new position, looking at it from a new angle, any of the things like that. So it's hard to put into words properly, but those are kind of the specific examples of things that we would go through upon seeing certain actions happening. All right, question number 4. Oh, a second week to 12. Yeah, see, somebody noticed. Somebody did notice that was a mistake. So the question mark guy from 4.4. All right, well, then, you know what? I'm just not going to take it. It says it's not a spoiler, and then I could look at it off screen, but I'm just not going to take that one. The thing that annoys me on a new character, and maybe also an old character, and also that one new feature. I definitely want it to be between these two. I'm assuming new character and old character means characters we've made, like as players. That one new feature, though, to up and download your character settings, macros, whatever. I love it, but it isn't ready yet, right? Okay, well, that's barely even a question. No, it says right in the patch notes that it's not ready yet, so I'm just going to take the other question. I started on a new character and am about to be constantly in a party, but all these instance fights forcing me to leave a party. Should we be able to do instance encounters while in a party? You know, that was actually a really big request almost like 4 or 5 years ago, because new players essentially couldn't play with their friends until level 15 plus, until you got the first dungeon, and that of Sastasha, because you have all these solo instances that your friends are basically not a part of. Now, back then we talked about it more because, you know, back when level 50 was the cap, those first 15 levels were a sizable chunk of your initial experience. Now I guess it goes by so fast, and there's so many instances compared to solo instances in the game that people just kind of don't really talk about it anymore. I have no issues with them opening it up to being like, you know, something that you could do with a group, but they'd have to redesign it to be more like something that enters from the duty finder, and I don't know if that's a way they are looking to design these types of instances, so it would be probably a technological struggle above all else. I'm perfectly okay with the idea, though. And the final question that's over here on the forums. Hello, Happy. Here I am once again. Hello. I've been away from 14 for some time, and the new patch didn't seem interesting at all, so I didn't resub. I feel like at this point, the only thing I like about 14 is the story. Every single idea they have for the game has had a terrible implementation. For example, I remember being hyped for Diadem. They sold the idea really well. I didn't think they sold the idea really well, so you're alone on that one for me. Squadrons, all they had to do was implement some kind of gamuts. They could even implement some kind of progression for those gamuts. This in particular pisses me off. It just ended up being an alternate way to level your jobs. I mean, the way it's supposed to be more so is that you're supposed to be training them. They're not supposed to be there for you. You're supposed to be there for them. So them being kind of incompetent compared to you is almost by design. It doesn't necessarily make it better or worse, but it is what it is. I'm actually perfectly okay with the way Squadrons ended up working out, especially because I can get tier 3 FC actions for myself whenever I may need them. And I'd like to stock up on them before expansions, because sometimes there's just... I don't know, there's like, we only have 2 actions, and sometimes maybe I want more actions. So I actually like Squadrons for what they bring on that regard, but yeah, they are more for leveling alternate jobs. Both deep dungeons are really straightforward, not really enough variance between runs, the replay abilities for leveling jobs and farming weapons. Would like to change more things on the second. Yeah, I think we mostly agree, most people agree. Even the changes they did make, they should have, I guess they don't appear frequently enough. Like, the Magicites are fine. I think they appear frequently enough. The auspices appearing in there don't really appear all that much for them to be even considered an implementation. The big floors are probably the best part of the whole new thing. And yeah, I'd like to see them do more, but I was happy to see that it was basically just a better version of Palace, because doing a better version of something is still a better version. I think they could have tuned up the bosses a little bit too. But I'm hoping for the 3rd deep dungeon they actually come up with a few more new ideas. I'm sure they're going to experiment with new types of floors overall, but I feel like they should double down on some of the ideas they have in there. You know, it is largely a game of chance in there when you get to the higher floors, and there's a lot of random occurrences that can make the experience go super smooth, or can make it even more frustrating than usual. So I'd like to see them expand on the system more. I've mentioned it before, but I'd like to see leaderboards for things like that. You know, I like leaderboards because leaderboards encourage people to work towards being on the top. And they have them for Deep Dungeon, but they're not really incorporated in an interesting way. I'd almost like to see seasons for stuff like that, where, you know, they have seasons and, you know, people climb to the top and then it resets their points and maybe they get something for it. Almost like a PvE ladder, similar to like how PvPers get rewards at the end of the season based on performance. Something that gives it a little bit more oomph into the content, you know, and kind of propels it to be something that isn't just for leveling alternate jobs. Eureka is a missed opportunity. I like grinding. I've played many mindless games. What are games? Grinding games. Those are games. And Eureka, though, not at all. Yeah, I mean, I don't mind grinding, but, you know, I beat all the tougher raids, so just killing enemies doesn't really appeal to me either. I know you like jump puzzles, and I still don't know why. They're boring. Good jump puzzles are really good. Jump puzzles that actually challenge you are really good. Blitzball is awful. It's Blitzball is kind of just a game of abuse. Nobody really plays it the way you're supposed to play it, more like underwater soccer. Everyone just kind of abuses the systems that are very easily abused in Blitzball. And it's kind of just only input. It's kind of like Chocobo Racing in Final Fantasy VII. Listen, or the Battle Arena even, I wouldn't do those things if they weren't super important for some sort of OP reward. And in Final Fantasy XIV, they never will be. They'll always be for things like MGP or like an outfit or something. They're never going to be for the ultimate weapon, which is the only way you got me to do those mini games in those games in the first place. Whereas with jump puzzles, you know, I look back to my childhood. I look back to the NES and the SNES with all the side-scrolling platformers and the precise jumps that you could do in those things. And then as going into my, you know, teenage years, my adult years, you know, much harder platformers started coming out. 14 is not a game that's particularly built around platforming, but there's a satisfaction upon doing something correctly, coming up with just the right momentum, finally completing something after failing a bunch of times. And platformers are like a fast-paced way of going about that. Sometimes a little too fast-paced, but that's my thing. Whereas Blitzball is just, ugh. And especially if it's the 10-2 Blitzball, because that's not even Blitzball, that's Football Manager. It's Blitzball Manager. But overall, I mean, Stormblood's been kind of like a... By the way, I just noticed you didn't even have a question here, so please don't just post things like this, because as much as I got to bring up a lot of discussion points, I was hoping there would be a point to it all at the end, and there isn't. It's just a rant, and I'm only going to include it in the video this week because I don't really have a lot of questions, so I guess there's room for it. But, you know, Stormblood kind of just did Heavensward better than Heavensward. I'd still argue Eureka is a better implementation than Diadem. It's just not in any way... It's a better implementation, but it's not better content, if that makes sense. It probably doesn't, but I'm not going to get too deep into that. And I'd say overall, the rest of the design has been far more on point. I'd say the only couple of things they've maybe lacked in is they haven't... I don't feel like they've given Soken enough freedom in terms of his music, because he's been doing a lot of stuff that's been either remasters or reworks of pre-existing Final Fantasy tracks, and I feel like he hasn't gotten to shine so much. We got to see him shine a little bit more this patch, but I'd like to always see him shine more. I think our dungeons, I just said after the burn in St. Mosians, I'm like, these are the kind of dungeons, or the dungeons overall in Stormblood make me okay getting less dungeons, because I hated like 80% of Heavensward's dungeons after. I can think of maybe like 3 or 4 dungeons that I really liked after the initial implementation of dungeons, of the dungeons overall. And then I think like the Vault was the only dungeon I liked leveling up. I hated all the other dungeons on launch. I guess Fractal was actually good. So I only like 2 dungeons on launch. In this patch, I really, in Stormblood, I only really didn't like Castrum Abania. And it's still to this point, the only dungeon I don't really like in Stormblood. Whereas in Heavensward, man, I can just think of so many dungeons like could have been so much more, like the Anti-Tower, but just ended up just falling flat. And in this expansion, I feel like they've done a much better job with the dungeons overall, especially the Burn. The Burn is definitely one of the top dungeons for me. I feel like they've expanded on, they've just expanded on the things that have worked and just made them better for the most part. PvP being the only thing debatable, because some people are not a fan of it in this current implementation, but I can't really be a judge, jury, or executioner on PvP, so I shouldn't really even talk about it. But I don't know. I do want to see them shake it up. I am absolutely in that, but if they're gonna do the same thing, constantly improving it is the route I take, because I ultimately am used to playing this game, and I'm used to playing those things, and I'm used to them being a certain quality. And if they can raise the bar for that, I'm all down. I'm all down for that. Which is not the way that phrase goes, but it's how I'm going to use it. So yeah, I mean, I don't know what else to say, because like I said, you didn't ask a question, so there's nothing to add. There's nothing I can add to it. You know, it's just it is what it is. So anyway, thank you everyone for asking your questions for this week's episode of Mondays with Mr. Happy. On the forum thread, it will properly say episode 214 for the next one. So please ask your questions there, as I'm sure you have quite a few of them, and I expect to have to do a lot of spoiler work in the next video because of some things that have happened. But anyway, I'm gonna wrap up and go get some sleep. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Be sure to ask your questions. Go to the description of the video and you know, go to the Dream Network forum thread that's linked there and ask your questions there. I will see all of you fine ladies and gentlemen in the next episode of Mondays with Mr. Happy, with hopefully more than 5 questions or 4 questions and a rant, and I'll see you guys next time. So thank you, and until next time, take care.